My brother framed me 8 years ago and now the truth is out. What should I do? Hello Reddit. I'm reaching out through a throwaway account because I'm in a difficult situation and could use some advice on how to navigate through it. To give you a bit of context, I'm the younger sibling in my family, and the story I'm about to share has been weighing on me for years. I'll try to recount everything as accurately as possible so you can understand the full picture. Growing up, my brother Ross was always the golden child. He could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Even when he struggled in school and brought home poor grades, my parents would rally around him, offering encouragement and support to help him improve. Meanwhile, I was constantly met with disappointment, even when I achieved good results. It always felt like nothing I did was ever enough. For instance, when Ross graduated from high school, he was gifted a brand new car and had a lavish party thrown in his honor. In contrast, I received a mere $500 and a lukewarm pat on the back. Despite this, Ross wasn't a terrible brother, but we mostly lived our separate lives. I didn't voice my frustrations often, but I knew deep down that I needed to create my own path. I ended up going to college far from home and eventually earned my MBA in 5 years. Afterward, I returned to my hometown to start my career. During these years, I only saw my family on special occasions like birthdays and holidays. Ross, on the other hand, had always struggled academically. He barely scraped through high school, and after dropping out of college, my parents helped him open a small hardware store to give him a fresh start. I was genuinely happy for him, but I was also focused on building my own life. Around this time, I started dating Linda, a girl I met in college. She was 22, from the same hometown, and we moved in together when we returned. She quickly found a job, and we began to build our lives together. In the winter of 2006, I decided it was time for Linda to meet my family. To my surprise, they were incredibly warm and welcoming toward her. For the first time in my 22 years, I felt a sense of acceptance and love from them that I hadn't experienced before. However, throughout the entire evening, I noticed Ross casting lingering glances at Linda. At the time, I brushed it off as nothing more than curiosity. But after that night, things began to change. Ross started dropping by our place more frequently. Where we used to see each other only every few months, he suddenly became a near-daily presence in our lives. At that point, I had to draw a line and tell him that while he was welcome to visit occasionally, I didn't want him coming over every day, especially in the evenings when Linda and I were both unwinding after a long day at work. This led to a heated argument with my parents. Eventually, he apologized, promising not to impose on us again. After that, he would only visit once a month on a weekend, which was perfectly fine by me. He tried to engage with Jenna, but their conversations never went beyond small talk, and I was okay with that too. Life carried on like this for a while until 2009, when I proposed to Linda, and we shared the news with our families. My parents were thrilled, but my brother simply shook my hand and left the small gathering I had arranged to celebrate the occasion. After that, I didn't see him for about 2 weeks. We tied the knot in 2010. Around that time, I noticed my brother had brought a +1 to the wedding and he mentioned that they were dating. For this story, I'll refer to her as Hannah. I thought maybe he had finally moved on from his feelings for Linda and was focusing on his own life. They moved quickly too, getting married just 9 months later in 2011. Meanwhile, my marriage was going well, and we welcomed 2 daughters, Alice in 2011 and Sarah in 2013. But my brother's marriage didn't go as planned, and they separated in 2012, just a few weeks after finalizing their divorce. Hannah reached out to me, telling me that Ross was obsessed with Linda, which was the main reason for their breakup. I expressed my sympathy and wished her the best. Linda mentioned that Hannah had always seemed a bit cold and distant toward her from the beginning. I decided to confront my brother in front of the rest of our family, asking him why his fixation on my wife was destroying his life. He was caught off guard and lied about everything. We had a huge fight, but in the end, I forgave him, and made it clear that he was no longer welcome in my home. Linda and my parents both spoke to me afterward, helping me realize that despite everything, he was still family. So I decided it was best to get along with everyone. It appeared as though he was genuinely making an effort to improve, so we carried on with our lives. I vividly remember that day in 2015, as if it happened just yesterday. It was July 25th, and I had a long list of things to do. Both of our kids had gone to visit their grandparents with my wife. After lunch, I received a call from my father. He was furious and demanded that I come over to their house immediately. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel the heavy tension in the air. My wife was in tears and my parents were trying to comfort her. Some of my cousins, aunts, and uncles were also present. When I inquired about what had happened, my parents threw out a shocking accusation. They claimed that I had assaulted a girl at a party I attended a few weeks prior and threatened her to keep quiet or face dire consequences. Rosa, who had been a friend for years, we went to high school together and were part of the same social circle, had accused me of following her to her car after the party, which had been held at a club, and assaulting her there. She had shown my wife screenshots of what she claimed were calls between us and recounted her entire story. My father struck me hard, and both of my parents made it clear they never wanted to see me again. Linda was furious, declaring that our relationship was over. I desperately tried to explain that I hadn't done anything of the sort, but no one would listen. I was essentially thrown out of their house and informed that Linda and the kids wouldn't be returning, and that my father would deliver their belongings to my apartment. When my father arrived, I begged and pleaded with him, but he simply packed a few bags and warned me to stay away, or he would turn me into the police. By that evening, Ross had shared the screenshots and all the details in our extended family's WhatsApp group. I was promptly removed from the group by unanimous decision. Over the next few days, people from my circle of friends called to express their disgust and to tell me they never wanted to speak to me again. During that period, I was an absolute wreck. I couldn't eat, sleep, or even focus on work. Although my boss had heard the rumors, there was little he could do until the authorities decided to take action against me. He advised me to resign from the company voluntarily to protect my record, assuring me that he'd arrange for me to bypass the notice period. I tried to present my case, but he warned me that if the authorities got involved, he'd be expelled regardless. He also mentioned that due to the severity of the situation, I wouldn't receive any severance pay, and my professional record would be tarnished. Reluctantly, I agreed to his terms and left the company a few days later. By mid-August, still grappling with my feelings of despair, I received 2 court documents. One was a disinheritance letter, and the other was a divorce petition. Despite being heavily intoxicated, I found myself heading to my parents' home. My brother, upon seeing me, unleashed his anger, beating me severely and remarking that I deserved to be thrown out of the family. By the time he was done, I was bleeding, barely able to stand. My parents and wife stood by, watching in silence, offering no help. After some time, I managed to pick myself up, overwhelmed by tears, realizing that I had lost everyone and everything I had ever known. I remained confined to my room throughout the divorce proceedings. The outcome was as favorable as it could be under the circumstances. I wasn't required to pay child support or alimony, as I was unemployed, and my now ex-in-laws agreed to cover the expenses for the child. By January 2016, my marriage was officially over, but piecing my life back together proved to be a monumental task. During that time, I contemplated reaching out to Rosa, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it would only make things worse. In this country, the legal system heavily favors women, and one phone call could have easily landed me in prison for 5 or 6 years. In February 2016, I was involved in a severe accident that left me hospitalized for 5 weeks. The hospital staff informed me that they had contacted my emergency contact, who was still Linda at the time, but she had hung up and no one came to see me. Once I recovered, I realized that my savings were nearly depleted, and I needed to get back on my feet, if only to secure a roof over my head. However, it became clear that staying where I wasn't an option. So, I sold all my furniture, paid off the remainder of my rent, and decided to start anew somewhere else. I relocated to a city a couple of hours away, hoping to land a job, but I struggled to find any opportunities. During that period, I had a tendency to drink excessively, and thoughts of ending my life frequently crossed my mind. Nearly every time she experienced a nightmare, she would wake up drenched in cold sweat. This pattern continued for 4 long months until I unexpectedly ran into an old college acquaintance named James. Back in college, he was the quiet type, barely engaging with anyone. It felt surreal to see him after all these years, especially since he recognized me from the crowd and called out my name. We exchanged greetings and spent some time catching up on where life had taken us. I explained that I had moved to the city in search of work. James, on the other hand, mentioned that he had recently left his job and was planning to start his own management consulting firm. He then suggested we grab a drink together later, where we delved into discussions about our careers. During our conversation, he offered me a position with his new firm, explaining that he needed a few sharp individuals to join his team. At that point, I realized that immersing myself in work might help me escape the dark thoughts that plagued my mind, so I accepted his offer. However, I made it clear that I wanted to meet his team and get to know them before moving forward. 2 days later, James introduced me to another guy named Paolo and mentioned that for now, it would just be the 3 of us. I shook Paolo's hand and then shared something important with them before we proceeded any further. I opened up about everything I had been through during that time, how I had been rejected and divorced, breaking down in tears as I spoke. James and Paolo expressed their sympathy, but they reassured me that there would be no issues as long as I didn't have a criminal record. I assured them that the police had never been involved, which seemed to put them at ease. James did mention that he would arrange for a thorough background check just to be cautious, and I understood his reasoning, agreeing with him. At that time, I was living in a shabby apartment, trying to save as much money as possible. I waited patiently for 2 weeks, but I also continued to search for other job opportunities in case this one didn't pan out. James finally called me after those 2 weeks, and we met up later that day. He informed me that my background check had come back clean and welcomed me to the team. From that moment on, I threw myself into work and started attending therapy. Following Paolo's suggestion, I also joined a gym, channeling much of my pent-up anger into the punching bag. This routine helped me transform from an average weight of 155 pounds to a fit 215 pounds. Paolo and I became workout partners, and since he was around my late brother's age, I began to see him as an older sibling. By the end of 2018, I had gained a lot more control over my life. My consulting business was thriving, and the money was steadily flowing in. I found a cozy apartment in a nice neighborhood and decided to settle in. As I started to heal, both physically and emotionally, I knew it was time to take some steps to move forward with my life. One of those steps was legally changing my last name. I headed to the courthouse and adopted Paolo's last name, with his and his parents' blessing. They had always treated me like family, including me in important moments like Paolo's wedding, and this felt like a fitting way to express my gratitude. Over the years, I attempted to date a few times, but my struggles with mental health made it difficult to form lasting connections. In 2019, I began seeing Kim, a woman of mixed Korean and Italian heritage. She worked at the local coffee shop where I often grabbed my morning brew, and sometimes lingered to enjoy it. That's where we first met, though it was nothing more than exchanging pleasantries during my orders. One day, when Paolo and I were at the cafe together, he noticed how often she glanced my way and urged me to ask her out. I hesitated, but finally mustered the courage to invite her for drinks later that day. Our first date went well, and she expressed a desire to see me again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this relationship would end like all the others. Each time I shared my past, it became too much for them to handle. I didn't hold it against them, though. So, on our second date, when we were out for lunch, I made the decision to be upfront with Kim about my history. I wanted her to make an informed choice before we got any further involved. She seemed taken aback but listened as I assured her that I was working hard to leave the past behind and that I would never repeat the mistakes I'd made. I emphasized that she needed to understand what she was stepping into if she chose to keep seeing me. A few days later, Kim reached out, asking to meet up. We returned to the coffee shop where she worked, and she told me that she trusted me and was willing to give our relationship a shot. I was overwhelmed with disbelief and even shed a few tears, realizing that maybe, just maybe, my life was beginning to find a new normal. We continued to date, and I found myself genuinely enjoying our time together. It felt like the start of my healing process. Our first big adventure together was a trip to Europe, which was the first time I had traveled in years. We both had an amazing time, creating memories that would last a lifetime. When the pandemic hit in 2020, we stayed connected through phone calls and FaceTime. As the world began to slowly return to normal later that year, Kim asked if she could move in with me. Without hesitation, I agreed. She had recently lost her job at the coffee shop and was searching for new opportunities. Knowing she was a talented cook, I suggested she consider opening her own place and pursuing a career in the food industry. By mid-2021, using funds from her parents, she established a cloud kitchen that served the nearby neighborhoods. Life seemed to be on the right track for both of us. Although I still grappled with emotional struggles, the thoughts of ending my life had diminished, though they occasionally haunted my dreams. In February 2023, Kim revealed she was pregnant, and my emotions spiraled. I oscillated between excitement at starting anew and sorrow from missing the past. Kim comforted me, and we eventually fell asleep in each other's arms. A few days later, I proposed to her, and she was overjoyed. It felt like things were finally aligning to bring some tranquility into my life. We were preparing for our wedding, set for mid-June this year, with plans moving full steam ahead. I apologize for the length of this post, but I felt it was necessary to share how chaotic my life has been recently. Toward the end of May, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, I heard someone crying. The voice on the other end said, "Hi, this is Rosa." I recognized her voice immediately and abruptly ended the call, trying to contain my anger. Kim was by my side and noticed how distraught I was, so she came over to comfort me. As I struggled to hold back my tears and fury, I explained who had called. When the phone rang again, Kim answered and put it on speaker. A man introduced himself as Rosa's fiancé, explaining that she wanted to apologize for her previous actions. Rosa took the phone, repeatedly sobbing and apologizing. While I was overwhelmed with tears and confusion, Kim took the lead in the conversation. She assured them that they would call back later. Then she called Paolo, who patiently listened as Kim recounted the events. He embraced me and suggested we arrange a meeting with a lawyer so Rosa's confession could be documented in case any issues arose later. I contacted my lawyer, who scheduled a meeting at his office and provided a date and time. I called Rosa and informed her to meet us at my lawyer's office so we could discuss the situation. 3 days later, we met at the lawyer's office. Rosa looked like she had been through hell, with her fiancé being her only support. My lawyer had set up a camera to record everything in the meeting room. I asked him to act as a mediator, and I brought Kim along for support. We sat across from each other as Rosa began recounting the events of the past. Much was discussed, but here's the crux of the matter. Back in 2015, Rosa was secretly involved with my brother. He was the mastermind behind the SOP plan, and Rosa, driven by her deep love for him, went along with it. He acquired a new phone and stole my profile picture from my WhatsApp account. They used it to fabricate fake screenshots, creating conversations between Rosa and me. My emotions shifted from sadness to rage. Had it not been for Kim's presence, I might have ended up facing assault charges. Kim, who was both furious and upset, partly due to her pregnancy, unleashed a verbal tirade against Rosa. Despite my lawyer's efforts to maintain calm, it was evident that Kim was seething with anger. She even warned Rosa's fiancé that if he went through with marrying her, he deserved whatever came his way. I held back my tears and anger, asking why they were coming forward now. Mark, her fiancé, stepped in to explain. He shared that a few weeks ago during a drunken night, Rosa confessed to having helped an ex-boyfriend ruin a marriage, a memory that had haunted him. After much probing and pressure from him, Rosa finally revealed the entire truth. Then he told her that if she truly desired peace in her life, she needed to take responsibility for her actions. After she assisted Ross, he became distant and cold, and within 6 months, their relationship ended. She was devastated, but fear kept her from confiding in anyone. She spent countless hours in therapy, trying to untangle her emotions and confront her issues. Once everything was laid bare, my attorney suggested we take a 30-minute break and reconvene afterward. Rosa and Mark left, and during the break, my lawyer and I discussed the possibility of suing her and my brother for defamation. The evidence was substantial, and I had every right to pursue it. Though I was furious, I didn't want this to cast a shadow over my wedding, so I decided to put my plans on hold until after the event. I told Rosa we would discuss things further, but for now, she should keep this to herself. I didn't want my ex's family stirring up any drama on my special day. After that meeting, Kim embraced me and said she was relieved to have trusted her instincts. She felt like a burden had been lifted, and I shared the same sense of relief. James and Paolo stood by my side as best men during our intimate wedding, and afterward, we embarked on a 3-week honeymoon across Europe. It was a magical time for us. Fortunately, I was able to process everything I'd learned, and Paolo advised me to let go of the negativity. Although the nightmares became more frequent, Kim was always there to comfort me. My therapist also encouraged me to eventually confront my ex-family to find closure. After much contemplation in July, I decided to speak with Rosa and tell her what she needed to do. I informed her that due to her actions, I was prepared to take legal action, but if she wanted to avoid financial loss, she had to follow my instructions. She needed to meet with Linda privately and confess everything she had told us in the lawyer's office. Rosa broke down in tears, revealing that Mark had left her. I told her I couldn't muster any sympathy, and that karma had a way of catching up with everyone. It had hit her hard, and now it was my brother's turn. A few days later, Linda sent me a text. Despite being blocked, I had always sent her birthday wishes, greetings for our daughters, and holiday messages. It had been 8 years since I'd heard from anyone. She wanted to talk, but I didn't feel comfortable doing it alone. So I told her I would call in a few hours. When the call came, I was home with Kim. I could hear Linda sobbing for a long time before she finally apologized, expressing how terrible she felt. I had remained calm throughout, but I told her it hurt deeply to know how little she thought of me, given how easily she was deceived by Ross. I asked about our daughters, and she assured me they were doing well. When I inquired about her meeting with Rosa, she said it had taken place 2 days earlier. It took her a long time to realize her mistake, but once she did, she distanced herself from me quickly. She immediately told my ex-parents, who were as shocked as she was. She shared with me that she married Ross a year after her divorce was finalized because he was the one who stood by her during that difficult time. Suddenly, everything became clear. He had never truly moved on from her. She also mentioned that they have a daughter together. After our conversation, I laid out what I expected to happen next and made a few specific requests. First, I wanted her to speak to all of my former in-laws, to make sure they understood what had really happened. Second, my only intention moving forward is to co-parent my 2 daughters. I have no desire to reconcile with her unless it's necessary for the sake of my relationship with them. Third, I told her I'd send a text with the date and time I planned to meet with my ex-parents-in-law. After that, I simply hugged Kim. Knowing she was pregnant and likely dealing with a flood of emotions, I made sure to keep my own feelings in check. I believe she cried for both of us, and we eventually fell asleep together on the bed. The next morning when I woke up, my phone was dead. Once I plugged it in and turned it back on, I noticed I had missed more than 50 calls and received a flood of text messages. I had even been added to the family group chat, where everyone was offering apologies. In the days that followed, several of my friends started sending messages to apologize for how they had jumped to conclusions and acted hastily. I responded in the family group chat, reminding them that I had been cast out of the family nearly 8 years ago, making me a stranger among them. I asked not to be added back into the group and promptly left it. Whether or not I forgive them would be on my terms and according to my own timeline, not theirs. A few family members tried to guilt-trip me, expressing their disappointment in how I responded. I told them they had no right to judge me after they were so quick to assume the worst, and I requested that they refrain from contacting me unless I initiated it. A few weeks later, I called Linda and asked her to bring my daughters over to my place for the weekend so I could reconnect with them. Kim, who was as bold and strong-willed as ever, insisted on meeting her stepdaughters too. We argued quite a bit, as we often do. I urged her to take care of herself, considering she was pregnant, but her stubborn nature won out, and I eventually gave in. We all met up at a local park. Linda looked a bit disheveled, but it was clear she had made an effort to present herself well for the occasion. That day, I saw Alice and Sarah for the first time in 8 years. They had changed so much, and the only memories I had of them were from old photos on my phone, as I had distanced myself from social media and other connections. Linda approached me in tears and attempted to hug me, but I gently blocked her with both hands. I then introduced her to Kim as my wife, and Linda broke down, crying uncontrollably right there in the park. Everyone seemed eager to speak with me, but she insisted on going first to apologize. I made it clear to her that what she had done was unforgivable. When I asked about the so-called golden child, she revealed that he had been thrown out of the house. I couldn't help but chuckle slightly. Kim approached her to offer some comfort, and we took seats nearby. I gathered both of my daughters close and shouted out, overwhelmed with emotion. My girls had only recently discovered the truth about me, having grown up believing H. Nuri was their father. Suddenly finding out about my existence stirred up a whirlwind of emotions for them, leading to tears and long conversations. By the day's end, we shared our stories and caught up on what had transpired in our lives. She recounted how she had married Ross a year later. For the first few years, he took good care of her, but eventually, life calmed down, and despite his efforts, Ross's gardening business never really took off. When COVID hit, it forced him to close his business for good. His parents had to dip into their savings to keep afloat. Although they encouraged him to start fresh, he never did. She confided in me that she is now seeking a divorce from Ross because she can't bear to be around him anymore. I told her she's free to make her own choices. It doesn't impact me. I also shared some thoughts about what the future might hold. In essence, I expressed my desire for Alice and Sarah to participate in family therapy sessions with me, so we could all heal together. They had been separated from their real father, and it was time to set things right. I wanted to be part of their lives moving forward. I also suggested that they spend weekends with me and Kim, but I mentioned that this would have to wait. Kim and I are expecting a baby soon, and for now, I need to focus all my attention on that. The last thing she said was that my parents wanted to talk to me. I firmly responded that she was mistaken. They were no longer my parents. I still held on to the letter where they had disowned me, sent along with the divorce papers. I wanted nothing to do with them anymore. But both she and Kim insisted that meeting with them might help me find closure. So I reluctantly agreed, telling her I would decide the time and place. I booked her a room at a hotel and asked her to stay in town for the night as it was Sunday and I wanted to spend more time with my daughters. On Sunday, we reunited. This time, I took the girls to explore the city and show them around. We had a wonderful day together. Before they left, they both hugged me tightly, and I promised them I'd see them the following week. I assured her she didn't need to worry about driving the girls to family therapy sessions because I would handle it from now on. My therapist recommended a good therapist in this city, and our first session went well. However, she emphasized that at some point, my daughters would need to know about what my former brother did, and I agreed that they would, in due time. She suggested that I write everything down here and seek outside perspectives on my situation. I can confidently say that Paolo's encouragement might not have led me to this point, which is why I'm sharing my story here. What should I do next? I know I need to talk to my former parents eventually, and though I refer to them as ex-parents, I still have some lingering care for them, strange as that may sound. And then there's Ross. How do I handle him? I don't think I ever want to see him again, yet I'm torn about whether to pursue a defamation suit to ruin him. I'm aware he has a daughter with my ex-girlfriend, and anything I do to him could affect her. I'm open to answering any questions you have.